Lonely millionaire kisses a random woman to make his ex jealous, but the next day, before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. Adrian Voss had learned to smile on command, but tonight, that skill was failing him miserably. The chandeliers of the Grandview Hotel ballroom cast golden shadows across his tailored tuxedo as he stood near the marble bar, nursing a glass of his own vineyard's finest Cabernet. Around him, Seattle's elite mingled in their predictable dance of small talk and strategic networking. But Adrian's attention was laser-focused on the entrance, where laughter, her laughter, had just echoed through the crowd. She's here. Through the sea of designer gowns and rented tuxedos, he spotted her immediately. Vivian Ashford, his ex-fiancée, swept into the charity gala like she owned the place. Her arm was linked with Thomas Brennan, the wine distributor who had stolen both his biggest contract and his bride-to-be 18 months ago. The same man who now whispered something in her ear that made her throw her head back in that theatrical way Adrian once found charming. Now, it just made his jaw clench. Still staring, I see. His business partner, Miles, appeared beside him with 2 fresh drinks. You know, there are exactly 47 other women in this room. Maybe try looking at one of them instead. Adrian accepted the scotch without breaking his gaze. I'm not staring. Right. And I'm not charging you double for therapy sessions disguised as business meetings. Miles followed his line of sight and winced. She's coming this way. Indeed, Vivian was gliding through the crowd with practiced grace, Thomas's hand possessively placed on her lower back. Her emerald dress, the same shade she'd worn to their first anniversary dinner, seemed chosen specifically to remind Adrian of what he'd lost. Adrian! Her voice carried that honey-sweet tone she reserved for public appearances. How wonderful to see you. You remember Thomas, of course? The handshake was firm, competitive. Thomas's smile was sharp as a blade. Great event tonight. Though I have to say the wine selection could use some diversification. The jab hit its mark, but Adrian's expression remained neutral. I'll pass that along to the committee. Vivian's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. Oh, don't mind him. Thomas is just passionate about his craft. Her fingers traced along Thomas's lapel. We both are. The subtext was clear. Look how happy I am. Look how perfectly we fit together. Look what you lost. Adrian felt his carefully constructed composure beginning to crack. The familiar tightness in his chest, the one that had plagued him since their public breakup, threatened to surface. He needed air. He needed space. He needed... His eyes caught movement across the room. A woman in a simple black dress was helping an elderly gentleman find his seat at one of the round tables. She moved with quiet efficiency, no fanfare, no audience to impress. When the old man's cane slipped, she caught it before it could fall, steadying him with gentle hands and a warm smile that reached her eyes. Something about her presence felt real, unlike everything else in this room. If you'll excuse me, Adrian heard himself saying, already moving away from Vivian's shocked expression. His feet carried him across the ballroom floor, past clusters of conversations about stock options and vacation homes, past servers balancing champagne flutes and canapes. The woman had finished helping the elderly gentleman and was now smoothing down her dress, a gesture that somehow struck him as endearingly nervous. She looked up just as he reached her. Her eyes were deep brown, framed by natural lashes and eyebrows that hadn't been sculpted by expensive beauticians. Her hair was pulled back in an elegant updo that showcased her graceful neck and the simple pearl earrings that were probably her only real jewelry in a room full of diamonds. She was beautiful in a way that didn't demand attention. It simply deserved it. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" she asked, her voice carrying a slight southern accent that sounded like home-cooked meals and front porch conversations. Adrian's mind went completely blank. Behind him he could feel Vivian's eyes boring into his back. He could sense the whispers starting, the curious glances, the smartphones probably already recording whatever was about to happen. And in that moment, standing before this woman whose name he didn't even know, Adrian Voss made the most impulsive decision of his carefully controlled life. "Not yet," he said softly, stepping closer. Then he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even the string quartet missed a note. But all Adrian could focus on was the way she tasted like vanilla and the way her lips, after the initial shock, didn't pull away. When he finally released her, her eyes were wide with surprise, her breathing shallow. She started, then stopped, her fingers unconsciously touching her lips. Adrian's heart was pounding so hard, he was certain everyone in the room could hear it. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have—" "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the resumed murmur of the crowd. "You shouldn't have." She turned and walked away, leaving Adrian standing alone in the middle of the dance floor, the taste of vanilla still on his lips, and the sudden, terrifying realization that he had absolutely no idea what he'd just done. But as he watched her disappear through the ballroom doors, one thought echoed through his mind with crystal clarity. He had to find her again. What would you do if a complete stranger kissed you in front of hundreds of people just to make their ex jealous? Would you slap them, walk away, or find yourself secretly hoping they'd find you again? Tell us in the comments. Have you ever been used as someone's revenge? Or have you ever made an impulsive move like Adrian's? Isla Bennett had replayed that kiss exactly 43 times since opening her eyes at 5:30 a.m. She knew because she'd been counting, hoping that reaching some arbitrary number would make the memory fade into the background noise of her morning routine. It hadn't worked. Every time she closed her eyes to rinse the shampoo from her hair, she could still feel the warmth of his hands on her face. Every sip of her coffee brought back the taste of expensive wine on his lips. Ridiculous, she told herself, lacing up her worn sneakers in the cramped entryway of her studio apartment. You don't even know his name. The morning Seattle rain drummed against her single window as she grabbed her chef's coat from the hook by the door. Her reflection in the hallway mirror showed no trace of last night's careful makeup or elegant updo. Just Isla in her everyday uniform, hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, face scrubbed clean, ready for another 12-hour shift at Copper and Sage Bistro. The walk to work usually cleared her head, but today the familiar route down Pine Street felt different. Every man in a business suit made her pulse jump. Every black sedan crawling through traffic made her wonder if someone was looking for her. "Stop it," she commanded herself, pushing through the bistro's back entrance. Rich men don't chase after waitresses they've kissed on a whim. This isn't a movie. "You're early," called Marcus, the sous chef, from behind the prep station. His knife work never paused as he spoke. "Hot date last night. You've got that I did something I shouldn't have look." Isla tied her apron with more force than necessary. "I helped serve at a charity gala. Nothing exciting." "Uh-huh." Marcus finally looked up, his dark eyes skeptical. "And that's why you're humming under your breath and checking the front windows every 30 seconds. Had she been humming? Isla forced herself to focus on the morning inventory, counting coffee beans and checking the dairy delivery. The bistro was her sanctuary. 40 seats of mismatched furniture, exposed brick walls decorated with local photography, and a menu that changed based on whatever fresh ingredients she could source from Pike Place Market. It was real. It was hers. And it was absolutely nothing like the glittering world she'd stumbled into last night. The morning rush passed in its usual blur of breakfast orders and caffeine-dependent customers. Isla lost herself in the rhythm of the kitchen, eggs over easy sourdough toast, her signature breakfast hash that kept regulars coming back. This was where she belonged, not in ballrooms full of people who probably spent more on a single bottle of wine than she made in a month. By 10 a.m., the breakfast crowd had thinned to a handful of laptop-wielding freelancers and one elderly couple sharing a cinnamon roll. Isla was refilling the coffee station when she heard the door chime. She turned around and nearly dropped the glass carafe. He was sitting at table 7, the small corner table with the wobbly leg that most customers avoided, but he didn't look bothered by its imperfections. In fact, he looked completely out of place in his obviously expensive suit, studying the handwritten menu like it contained state secrets. Their eyes met across the room, and Isla felt that same electric jolt from the night before. What is he doing here? For a moment, neither of them moved. The bistro's gentle morning sounds, the hiss of the espresso machine, quiet conversations, the clink of silverware, seemed to fade into white noise. Then he stood up. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying that same careful control she remembered. "I was hoping I could speak with you if you have a moment." Every instinct told her to grab Marcus from the kitchen, to hide behind the counter, to pretend she didn't recognize him. Instead, she found herself walking toward his table, the coffee pot still clutched in her hands like a shield. "I don't even know your name," she said quietly, stopping just out of arm's reach. "Adrian." He extended his hand, then seemed to think better of it, letting it fall back to his side. "Adrian Voss, and I owe you more than just an apology." "You owe me an explanation." The words came out sharper than she'd intended, but she didn't take them back. "What you did last night was inexcusable," he interrupted. running a hand through hair that was slightly less perfect than it had been at the gala. "I used you to make a point to someone who doesn't deserve that kind of attention. I embarrassed you in front of a room full of strangers, and I had no right." Isla blinked, caught off guard by his directness. She'd expected excuses, maybe charm, certainly not this raw honesty. "I've been up all night thinking about it," he continued, "about how you helped that elderly man find his seat, how you smiled at him like he was the most important person in the room, not just someone in your way. I realized—" He paused, searching for words. "I realized I haven't met anyone genuine in a very long time. So you thought you'd find me and what? Apologize and we'd be even?" "No." Adrian's voice was quiet but firm. "I thought I'd find you and ask if you'd let me buy you coffee. Real coffee. Not as an apology, but because I'd like to know the name of the woman whose morning I'm probably ruining right now." Despite herself, Isla felt her lips twitch toward a smile. "Isla, and you're not ruining it. You're just complicating it." "Isla," he repeated, and somehow her name sounded different in his voice. Softer, more real than it had ever sounded before. "What do you want from me?" she asked, and the question hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his eyes never leaving hers. When he finally spoke, his words were so honest they made her chest tight. "I want to know what it feels like to have breakfast with someone who doesn't care about my net worth or my wine ratings or who I was photographed with last week." He gestured to the empty chair across from him. "I want to know what normal feels like." Isla looked at the chair, then back at his face. She could see the exhaustion around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders that expensive tailoring couldn't hide. And despite every logical thought screaming in her head, she found herself setting down the coffee pot and pulling out the chair. "One coffee," she said, settling across from him. "And then you tell me exactly what last night was really about." Adrian's smile was the first genuine one she'd seen from him, and it transformed his entire face. "Deal," he said, and Isla had the sudden, terrifying feeling that she was about to discover exactly how much trouble one impulsive kiss could cause. The coffee between them had gone cold 20 minutes ago, but neither Adrian nor Isla seemed to notice. "So let me get this straight," Isla said, wrapping her fingers around her mug for warmth rather than caffeine. "You own 12 vineyards across Washington and California. You've been featured on the cover of Wine Spectator 3 times, and your ex-fiancé left you for your biggest competitor." Adrian nodded, his jaw tightening slightly at the last part. "Thomas Brennan. He used to distribute my wines exclusively until he decided my business and my personal life were worth stealing. And last night was your version of showing her you'd moved on?" "Last night was me being an idiot." Adrian's honesty was brutal in its simplicity. "I saw her laughing, touching his arm, wearing that dress that used to be my favorite, and suddenly I was 17 again, watching the popular kids at school and feeling like I'd never be good enough." Isla studied his face, noting the way his fingers drummed silently against the table, a nervous habit that seemed completely at odds with his polished exterior. "You don't strike me as someone who was ever not good enough for anything." "You'd be surprised." Adrian's smile was rueful. "I built everything I have from nothing, worked 3 jobs through college, lived on ramen and pride for years. When I finally made it, when I could afford the suits and the cars and the lifestyle, I thought that meant I'd arrived, that I'd never have to feel small again. But you did last night. Last night I felt like that broke kid again, watching someone else get what I thought was mine." He paused, meeting her eyes. "Until I saw you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Isla felt her cheeks warm under his gaze. "You don't even know me," she said softly. "I know you spent 15 minutes helping Mr. Patterson find his table, even though it meant missing the appetizer service. I know you chose comfort over beauty when you decided to wear flats instead of heels. I know you bit your lip when the violinist missed that high note, like it physically hurt you to hear music played incorrectly." Isla blinked, surprised. "You were watching me that closely." "I couldn't look away." Adrian's voice was quiet, almost confused by his own admission. "Even before I did what I did. There was something about the way you moved through that room like you belonged there, but not because of money or status, because you belonged everywhere." The bistro around them had filled with the lunch crowd, but their corner table felt insulated from the world. Isla became acutely aware of the sounds she usually tuned out, the gentle murmur of conversations, the soft jazz playing through the speakers, the rhythmic chopping from Marcus in the kitchen. "Tell me about this place," Adrian said, seeming to sense her need for safer ground. "It's yours." "Mine and the bank's," Isla admitted with a small laugh. "I've been the head chef here for 3 years, saved every penny to buy it from the previous owner when he retired. It's not much, but it's real," Adrian finished, and she was struck by how perfectly he understood. "Yeah, it's real." She gestured around the small space. "Every mismatched chair tells a story. That table by the window, I found it at a yard sale in Ballard. The couple who owned it had eaten breakfast there together for 37 years. The coffee machine is older than I am, but it makes the best espresso in the neighborhood." Adrian followed her gaze, and she watched something shift in his expression. "When was the last time you ate at a place like this?" she asked. He paused, genuinely thinking about it. "I honestly can't remember. Business dinners are usually at Le Bernardin or Canlis, private events at the club. I haven't sat in a restaurant where I could hear the chef humming in the kitchen in years." As if on cue, Marcus's off-key rendition of an old R&B song drifted from the kitchen, making Isla smile. "That's Marcus. He only hums when he's making his signature mac and cheese. It's not on the menu, but he makes it for regulars who've had a bad day." "How does he know when someone's had a bad day?" "He just knows. He's got this sixth sense about people." Isla paused, tilting her head. "Actually, he made a double batch this morning. I thought it was because Mrs. Chen from table 12 looked tired, but now I'm wondering if he somehow sensed you were coming. Is that his way of telling me I look like I need comfort food? His way of telling me you do?" The moment stretched between them, comfortable in a way that surprised them both. Adrian found himself studying the small details of Isla's world, the way she unconsciously straightened the salt and pepper shakers, how her eyes lit up when she talked about her regulars, the tiny scar on her knuckle that spoke of countless hours with sharp knives. "I should probably get back to work," Isla said eventually, though she made no move to stand. "Of course. I've already taken up too much of your time." Adrian. His name felt strange on her lips, but right somehow. "Why did you really come here today?" He was quiet for a long moment, his fingers finally stilling on the table. When he looked up, his eyes held a vulnerability that made her chest tight. "Because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. Not just the kiss, though believe me, I haven't stopped thinking about that either, but the way you looked at me afterward, like you could see right through all the expensive clothes and practiced charm to whatever was underneath." "And what's underneath?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I've been playing a part for so long I'm not sure I remember who I was before I put on the costume, but when you looked at me last night, for just a moment, I felt like maybe that person was still in there somewhere." Isla's heart did something complicated in her chest. She'd dated men before, nice men, safe men, men who fit perfectly into her world. But none of them had ever looked at her like she held the answer to a question they'd been afraid to ask. "This is crazy," she said quietly. "Completely insane," Adrian agreed. "You're probably going to break my heart. You'll probably save my life." The words slipped out before he could stop them, raw and honest and terrifying in their truth. Isla stared at him, seeing past the expensive suit to the man underneath, the one who was just as scared as she was, just as uncertain about what they were walking into. "One more coffee," she heard herself saying. "Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. before the breakfast rush." Adrian's smile was slow and genuine. "It's a date. It's coffee," she corrected, but she was smiling too. "Right, coffee." As he stood to leave, Adrian paused at the door, looking back at her across the small bistro. "Isla? Yeah? Thank you for giving me a chance to be better than the man I was last night." And as the door closed behind him, Isla realized she was in far more trouble than one impulsive kiss could account for. Isla had changed her shirt 3 times before settling on the simple blue button-down that brought out her eyes, then immediately questioned why she cared what brought out her eyes for a casual coffee meeting. "It's just coffee," she reminded herself for the 100th time, unlocking the bistro's front door at 6:45 a.m., with a man who probably thinks casual means wearing a tie that costs more than your rent. The morning Seattle mist clung to the windows as she went through her opening routine, starting the espresso machine, checking the pastry delivery from the bakery down the street, arranging the day's fresh flowers in mason jars. Everything felt normal except for the nervous flutter in her stomach that had kept her awake half the night. At exactly 7 o'clock, she heard the soft chime of the door. Adrian stepped inside, and Isla had to bite back a smile. Gone was the expensive suit from yesterday. Instead, he wore dark jeans that actually looked like he'd owned them for more than 5 minutes, a simple grey sweater and, most surprisingly, scuffed leather boots that had clearly seen some actual wear. "You look," she started, then stopped, not sure how to finish the sentence. "Different?" Adrian suggested, running a hand through his hair. "I raided my closet for anything that didn't come with a dry cleaning receipt. Found these jeans in the back. I think I bought them for a vineyard tour about 5 years ago and never wore them again. They suit you." And they did. The casual clothes stripped away some of the armor he'd been wearing, made him look younger, more approachable, more real. "Coffee?" Isla offered, already reaching for 2 mugs. "Please, and whatever you're having for breakfast, I want to try something from your world." 20 minutes later, they sat across from each other again, this time sharing a plate of Marcus's famous breakfast hash and thick slices of sourdough toast slathered with local honey butter. Adrian ate with the focused attention of someone discovering a new language, pausing between bites to really taste the food. "This is incredible," he said, pointing his fork at the hash. "What's in it?" "Secrets in the seasoning," Isla replied, pleased by his genuine appreciation. "Marcus won't even tell me the exact blend. Says it's his grandmother's recipe from Louisiana, passed down through 3 generations of stubborn women who refuse to write it down. Smart women. Some things are worth protecting." Adrian took another bite, then looked up at her. "Like this place. How long have you wanted to own a restaurant?" "Since I was 12 and my mum taught me to make biscuits from scratch." Isla's voice softened with memory. "She worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat after my dad left, but Sunday mornings were sacred. She'd wake me up early and we'd bake together before church. She used to say that feeding people was the closest thing to magic she'd ever found." "Where is she now?" "Cancer took her 6 years ago." The words still came out carefully, like she was handling something fragile. "She never got to see me buy this place, but I like to think she'd be proud." Adrian reached across the table without thinking, covering her hand with his. "She would be. Anyone can see how much love you put into this place." The touch was simple, comfort offered without calculation, but it sent warmth up Isla's arm and straight to her chest. She looked down at their joined hands, his pale against her darker skin, both bearing the small scars that came from working with your hands. "What about you?" she asked, not pulling away. "When did you fall in love with wine?" "College job at a restaurant in Portland. The sommelier there took pity on this broke kid who was clearly out of his depth, serving $100 bottles to people who knew more about wine than I knew about anything." Adrian's thumb traced unconsciously across her knuckles. "He started teaching me during slow shifts. How to read terroir in a glass, why some vintages sang while others fell flat. I was hooked. From server to owner. That's quite a leap. Took 15 years and more failures than I care to count. My first vineyard was 8 acres of neglected vines in Walla Walla that everyone said would never produce anything worthwhile." Adrian's smile held pride mixed with old pain. "The bank foreclosed on it 3 years later. But you didn't give up." "Couldn't. I'd tasted what those vines could become. It just took me a while to figure out how to get there without going broke again." Isla studied his face, noting the way his eyes focused on something beyond the window when he talked about those early struggles. "You miss it, don't you? The simplicity of it." "I miss knowing exactly who I was fighting for," Adrian admitted. "Back then, every decision was about survival. Now," he gestured vaguely, encompassing his current life, "now I have managers and consultants and board meetings about brand positioning. Sometimes I feel like I'm running someone else's company. So why not change it?" The question hung between them, simple and complex all at once. Adrian's eyes refocused on her face, and she could see him considering possibilities he'd perhaps forgotten existed. "It's not that easy. There are investors, employees, obligations." "I'm not saying burn it all down," Isla interrupted gently. "But maybe there's a middle ground between the broke kid with 8 acres and the man who's forgotten why he fell in love with wine in the first place." Before Adrian could respond, the door chimed and Mrs. Patterson shuffled in, the elderly woman who came for tea and a blueberry muffin every morning at 7:30 sharp. "Morning, Mrs. P," Isla called out, automatically standing to help the woman to her usual table. "How's the arthritis today?" "Oh, you know. Some days are diamonds, some days are rust." Mrs. Patterson's eyes fixed on Adrian with undisguised curiosity. "And who's this handsome young man?" "This is Adrian," Isla said, helping the older woman into her chair. "Adrian, meet Mrs. Patterson. She's been coming here longer than I've owned the place." "Pleasure to meet you," Adrian said, standing and offering a slight bow that made Mrs. Patterson giggle. "Oh my, manners and everything. You better keep this one, dear," she said to Isla with a wink that made both of them blush. As Isla bustled around preparing Mrs. Patterson's usual order, Adrian watched her work. The way she remembered exactly how the woman liked her tea, the gentle patience with which she listened to stories about grandchildren and doctor's appointments, the unconscious smile that never left her face when she was taking care of people. This was who she was. Not the elegant woman at the charity gala, but this, someone who made the world a little softer, a little kinder, one cup of tea at a time. When Oisler returned to their table, Adrian was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "You," he said simply. "You're exactly who you appear to be, aren't you? No masks, no performance, just Isla. Is that a bad thing?" "It's terrifying," Adrian admitted. "And wonderful, and I have absolutely no idea what to do with someone like you." "Well," Isla said, settling back into her chair, "maybe you could start by telling me what you do when you're not running a wine empire or kissing strangers at charity galas." Adrian laughed, the sound surprised and genuine. "Honestly, I work. I go to business dinners. I attend events where people tell me how successful I am." He paused, realizing how empty that sounded. "I can't remember the last time I did something just because I wanted to." "When's the last time you took a day off?" "Define day off." "A whole day, 24 hours. No emails, no phone calls, no thinking about business. Just being." Adrian stared at her like she'd suggested he sprout wings and fly. "I don't think I've ever done that." "Never?" "Not since I was a kid. Maybe not even then." Isla shook her head in amazement. "No wonder you look exhausted. When's the last time you did something that made you laugh? Really laugh, not the polite chuckle you give at networking events." The question struck him as profoundly sad. When was the last time? He honestly couldn't remember. "I think," Adrian said slowly, "you might be the first person in years to ask me that question." "Well then," Isla said, her eyes sparkling with something that looked like mischief, "I think it's time we fix that." And sitting there in the warm light of her bistro, with the smell of fresh coffee and the sound of Mrs. Patterson humming softly at her corner table, Adrian felt something inside his chest that he'd almost forgotten existed: hope. 3 days later, Adrian found himself doing something he hadn't done in over a decade, walking through Pike Place Market with no agenda, no schedule, and his phone turned off. Isla walked beside him, her canvas tote bag slung over her shoulder, as she selected ingredients for what she'd mysteriously called a proper home-cooked meal. She moved through the crowded market with the confidence of someone who belonged there, stopping to chat with vendors who clearly knew her by name. "Try this," she said, appearing at his elbow with a small paper cup filled with honey so golden it seemed to capture sunlight. Adrian tasted it and felt his eyebrows rise. "That's incredible." "What kind?" "Wildflower honey from the San Juan Islands. Mrs. Kowalski's bees have been producing it for 30 years. Isla gestured toward an elderly woman whose stand was covered in mason jars of varying amber hues. "She says the secret is letting the bees choose their own flowers instead of forcing them into monoculture." "Smart bees," Adrian murmured, watching Isla purchase 2 jars with the easy familiarity of a regular customer. "Smart beekeeper," Isla corrected. "She taught me that the best flavors come from giving things room to be what they naturally are, instead of trying to control every variable." The words felt loaded with meaning that went beyond honey, and Adrian found himself studying Isla's profile as she examined a display of heirloom tomatoes. Was she talking about bees or about him? "Mr. Voss?" The voice cut through the market noise like a blade. Adrian turned to see Miles approaching through the crowd, his business partner's face tight with the expression that usually meant crisis management. "Miles," Adrian's stomach dropped. "What are you doing here?" "Looking for you. Your assistant said you'd taken the afternoon off, which I knew had to be a mistake because you haven't taken an afternoon off since—" Miles stopped mid-sentence, his eyes landing on Isla. "Oh." The way he said it, like pieces of a puzzle clicking into place, made Adrian's jaw clench. "Isla, this is Miles Crawford, my business partner." "Miles," Isla Bennett. Miles extended his hand with the practiced charm of someone who made a living reading people and situations. "Ms. Bennett, what a pleasure." Isla shook his hand, but Adrian could see the way she withdrew slightly, sensing the shift in atmosphere. "Nice to meet you." "I hate to interrupt," Miles continued, though his tone suggested he didn't hate it at all. "But we have a situation that requires your immediate attention. The Pemberton account can wait until tomorrow," Adrian finished firmly. "Actually, it can't. They're threatening to pull their entire order unless we can guarantee delivery by Friday. That's a $2 million account, Adrian. We need you to make some calls. The familiar weight of responsibility settled back on Adrian's shoulders like a lead blanket. He could feel the moment slipping away, the lightness he'd been carrying for the past 3 days, the simple pleasure of walking through a market with a woman who made him forget about profit margins and delivery schedules. "Give me 5 minutes," he said to Miles, then turned to Isla. "I'm sorry. This is exactly what I was talking about." "It's fine," Isla interrupted, but her voice had cooled several degrees. "Business is business." "No, it's not fine. This is my afternoon off. My first real afternoon off in—" "How long?" Miles interjected, his tone carefully neutral but his eyes sharp with curiosity. "That's not the point," Adrian said through gritted teeth. "Actually, it kind of is," Isla said quietly. She'd stepped back far enough that she was no longer within the easy intimacy they'd been sharing. "This is your real life, Adrian. Board meetings and $2 million accounts, and people who need you to make decisions that affect dozens of jobs. And this is mine," she continued, gesturing to the market around them, "buying honey from Mrs. Kowalski and choosing tomatoes that smell like summer. We both knew this was just a nice break from reality." The words hit Adrian like a physical blow. "That's not what this is." "Isn't it?" Before he could answer, his phone buzzed. Then again, and again. Even turned off, the business world had found him. Miles cleared his throat delicately. "The call with Pemberton is scheduled for 3 o'clock. That gives us about 20 minutes to strategize." Adrian looked between Miles's expectant face and Isla's careful distance, feeling like he was standing at a crossroads with no map. "Go," Isla said, making the decision for him. "Handle your crisis, I'll get home on my own." "Isla, really, it's fine." But her smile was polite now, the kind she probably gave to difficult customers. This was fun while it lasted. She turned to walk away, and something desperate clawed at Adrian's chest. "Wait." Isla paused but didn't turn around. "Have dinner with me tonight. Let me cook for you this time." Now she did turn, surprise flickering across her features. "So you cook?" "I'm learning," he said, aware of how pathetic that sounded. "Please, let me prove that this isn't just a nice break from reality for me." Isla studied his face for a long moment, and Adrian felt like she was weighing something far more important than a dinner invitation. 7 o'clock, she said finally. "But if your phone rings during dinner, it won't. Then this really is just a nice break from reality, and we should probably acknowledge that before one of us gets hurt." She walked away then, disappearing into the crowd with her canvas bag and the honey that tasted like sunlight. "Well," Miles said after a moment, "that was illuminating." "Don't," Adrian warned. "I'm just saying she seems different from your usual type." "My usual type? Women who understand that billion-dollar companies require a certain level of commitment. Women who don't expect you to turn off your phone and play house in farmers' markets." Adrian's hands clenched into fists. "Is that what you think I was doing, playing house? Weren't you?" Miles's tone was gentle but pointed. "Adrian, you've worked 15-hour days for the past 5 years. You've built something incredible. Something that employs over 200 people and supports dozens of family farms. And now you're ready to throw that away for a woman you met 4 days ago." "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm trying to find some balance. Balance is a luxury we can't afford right now." The Pemberton account will get handled," Adrian interrupted, "but not right now. Right now, I'm going to the grocery store to buy ingredients for dinner, and then I'm going home to figure out how to cook something that doesn't come from a restaurant or a catering company." Miles stared at him like he'd announced plans to join the circus. "You're serious? Dead serious? What about the call with Pemberton?" Adrian pulled out his phone and handed it to Miles. "You handle it. You know the account as well as I do." "Adrian, one night, Miles. I'm asking for one night to be a normal person who cooks dinner for a woman he's falling for. Can you give me that?" The admission slipped out before he could stop it, hanging in the air between them like a confession. Miles looked at the phone in his hand, then back at Adrian's face. After a moment, his expression softened slightly. "She really got to you, didn't she?" "Yeah," Adrian said quietly. "She really did," Miles sighed, pocketing the phone. "One night. But if this goes sideways with Pemberton, it won't. And if it does, we'll figure it out tomorrow." As Adrian walked away, heading toward the grocery store with absolutely no idea how to cook anything more complicated than scrambled eggs, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. He felt like the outcome of something actually mattered more than the bottom line, and that terrified him almost as much as it thrilled him. Adrian's kitchen looked like a war zone, Flour dusted every surface, including his hair. 3 different recipe printouts lay scattered across the granite countertop, splattered with what he hoped was olive oil, but might have been something worse. The smoke alarm had gone off twice, and he'd managed to burn water, which he hadn't even known was possible until today. At 6:47 p.m., 13 minutes before Isla was supposed to arrive, he stood surveying the carnage and seriously considered ordering takeout from the French restaurant down the street. No, he told himself firmly. You promised her homemade. You can figure this out. The pasta was edible. The sauce was a mystery that oscillated between too salty and completely bland with no middle ground. The salad looked decent, mainly because it was hard to mess up lettuce and tomatoes. The bread, however, was a complete disaster. A charcoal brick that had once been a baguette. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock. Adrian took a deep breath, wiped his hands on a dish towel that was somehow dirtier than his hands, and opened the door. Isla stood in the hallway wearing a simple sundress the color of summer sky and sandals that showed off painted toenails in soft coral. She carried a bottle of wine and wore an expression of barely contained amusement. You have flour in your eyebrows, she said by way of greeting. I have flour everywhere, Adrian admitted, stepping aside to let her in. I may have overestimated my culinary abilities. Isla's eyes swept over his penthouse apartment, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a stunning view of Elliott Bay, sleek modern furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine, and not a single personal touch that suggested anyone actually lived here. Nice place, she said, though something in her tone suggested she wasn't entirely sure she meant it. It came furnished, Adrian explained, suddenly seeing the space through her eyes. I bought it 3 years ago, but I've never really settled in. Where do you keep your books? Books. You know those rectangular things with pages, stories, recipes, something that tells me what Adrian Voss likes to read when no one's watching? Adrian realized with a start that he couldn't remember the last time he'd read anything that wasn't a business report or wine industry journal. I mostly read on my tablet, for work. Isla nodded like this confirmed something she'd suspected. And photos? Family, friends, vacation pictures? I don't really take vacations. Right. She moved toward the kitchen, drawn by the sounds of something bubbling on the stove. Holy, I know, Adrian said quickly, following her. It's bad. Really bad. I can order something from... Are you kidding me? Isla turned around, her face lit up with genuine delight. This is the most beautifully chaotic kitchen I've ever seen. You actually tried to make fresh pasta from scratch. YouTube made it look easier than it was. Isla picked up one of the recipe printouts, noting the handwritten modifications in the margins. And you tried to adjust the recipe based on altitude and humidity. Adrian, that's advanced cooking. Advanced disaster, maybe. No, this is... She gestured around the flour-dusted chaos. This is someone who cared enough to try something completely outside their comfort zone. When's the last time you did that? Never, Adrian admitted. I don't think I've ever done anything I wasn't already good at. Not since I was a kid. Isla moved to the stove, lifting the lid on the sauce and taking a careful taste. Her expression was thoughtful, considering. It needs acid, she said finally, and about half the salt you added. But the base is actually really good. Mind if I... She was already reaching for the refrigerator, pulling out a lemon and what looked like fresh herbs. You don't have to fix my mess, Adrian protested. I'm not fixing it, Isla said, efficiently slicing the lemon. I'm collaborating. There's a difference. For the next 20 minutes, Adrian watched Isla work magic with his disaster. She moved through his sterile kitchen like she belonged there, talking him through each adjustment, letting him be her sous chef in his own home. Taste this, she said, holding out a spoon of the transformed sauce. Adrian tasted it and his eyes widened. That's incredible. What did you do? Lemon juice to brighten it, fresh basil to complement the tomatoes, and a tiny bit of sugar to balance the acidity, and I drained half the salt water from the pasta pot. They sat down to eat at his dining room table, which Adrian realized he'd never actually used for dining. The pasta was perfectly al dente, the sauce bright and flavorful, and the salad fresh and simple. This is really good, Adrian said, surprised. It is, Isla agreed. We make a good team. The words hung between them, loaded with meaning that went beyond dinner preparation. Tell me something, Isla said, twirling pasta around her fork. When you were a kid, before you became a business empire, what did you want to be when you grew up? Adrian paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. You're going to laugh. Try me. A park ranger. The admission came out quietly, like a secret he'd been keeping even from himself. I wanted to live in the mountains, take care of the forests, teach kids about wildlife. I had this fantasy about a cabin by a lake where I'd write reports about bear migration patterns, and nobody would ever ask me about quarterly projections. Isla's smile was soft, understanding. What happened to that dream? Reality. My mom got sick my senior year of high school. Bills piled up. Park rangers don't make enough money to handle medical emergencies or keep families afloat. Adrian's voice grew quiet. I learned that dreams are luxuries you can't afford when people depend on you. And now? Who depends on you now? 200 employees, dozens of partner farms, investors, customers. Adrian rattled off the list like he'd memorized it. The usual suspects. But who depends on Adrian the person, not Adrian the CEO? The question stopped him cold. He sat there, fork suspended in midair, realizing he couldn't name a single person. He started, then stopped. I don't know. Isla reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard. Before Adrian could respond, his phone rang. The sound pierced the quiet intimacy they'd built, harsh and insistent. He glanced at the screen. Miles. Don't answer it, Isla said quietly. It might be important. It's always important. Her voice was gentle but firm. The question is whether it's more important than this moment, right here, right now. Adrian stared at the phone, feeling the weight of 15 years of conditioning pulling him toward it. Every instinct screamed at him to answer, to handle whatever crisis required his immediate attention. The phone stopped ringing, then, immediately, started again. Adrian, Isla said softly, what kind of man do you want to be? He looked at her across the table. This woman who'd turned his culinary disaster into something beautiful, who asked him questions that made him remember dreams he'd buried under balance sheets and profit margins. Adrian reached for his phone, held it for a moment, then deliberately turned it off and set it aside. The kind of man who finishes dinner with the woman who's changing his life, he said. Isla's smile was radiant. Good answer. They finished their meal in comfortable conversation, talking about everything except business, childhood memories, favorite movies. The way morning light looked different in every city. When they moved to the couch afterward, Isla curled up beside him, with a naturalness that felt like coming home. Thank you, Adrian said quietly, his arm around her shoulders. For what? For making me remember who I used to be, who I might still be, underneath all the corporate armor. Isla tilted her head to look at him. You don't have to choose between being successful and being human, you know. There's a middle ground. Is there? Because it feels like everyone in my world expects me to be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Then maybe it's time to change their expectations. Before Adrian could ask her what she meant, Isla's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and frowned. Everything okay? Adrian asked. It's Marcus. He never texts this late unless... She answered the call. Marcus, what's wrong? Adrian could hear the urgency in her friend's voice through the phone, though he couldn't make out the words. He watched Isla's face go pale. How bad? She asked. Okay, I'm coming. Don't touch anything until I get there. She hung up and was already reaching for her purse. What happened? Adrian asked, standing. Pipe burst in the bistro's kitchen. Marcus says there's water everywhere. Isla's voice was tight with controlled panic. I have to go. The damage could be... She didn't finish the sentence, but Adrian could see the fear in her eyes. Her restaurant, her dream, everything she'd worked for, threatened by something as random as a broken pipe. I'll drive you, Adrian said, already grabbing his keys. You don't have to. Yes, I do. His voice was firm, certain. We're a team, remember? And as they rushed out into the Seattle night, Adrian realized something had fundamentally shifted inside him. For the first time in years, someone else's crisis felt more important than his own. The sight that greeted them at Copper and Sage was worse than Isla had imagined. Water streamed from the kitchen ceiling, where an ancient pipe had finally surrendered to decades of Seattle dampness. The carefully arranged herbs on her prep station floated like tiny green boats in 2 inches of murky water. Her industrial mixer, the one she'd bought second-hand and lovingly restored, sat partially submerged, probably beyond saving. Oh, honey, Marcus said, appearing at her side with shop towels that were already soaked through. I tried to save what I could, but the water main valve is stuck, and the emergency number just keeps going to voicemail. Isla stood frozen in the doorway, watching 5 years of dreams literally washing away down the storm drains. The insurance would cover some of it, maybe, but the deductible alone would wipe out her savings, and if they had to close for repairs... The dining room's okay, Marcus continued, trying to find something positive. And the coffee machine is on the other side, so that's still working. But the stove, the prep area, all the dry storage. Adrian appeared beside her, having spent the last 10 minutes on his phone making calls that somehow resulted in a 24-hour plumber agreeing to come out immediately and a restoration company promising to be there within the hour. "Water's shut off," he said quietly. "Plumber's on his way." Isla nodded numbly, still staring at the destruction. "I can't afford this. You don't have to worry about that right now." "Yes, I do." Her voice cracked slightly. "This place is everything I have. So if I can't reopen quickly, I'll lose my regulars. Mrs. Patterson, the morning coffee crowd, the lunch business, they'll find other places. And once you lose customers," she didn't finish the sentence. They all knew how thin the margins were for small restaurants, how quickly a temporary closure could become permanent. "How long do you think repairs will take?" Adrian asked Marcus. 2 weeks minimum, maybe 3, if there's water damage to the electrical. And that's if we can find contractors who aren't already booked solid. Marcus shook his head grimly. Restaurant equipment isn't exactly high priority for most repair services. Adrian was quiet for a moment, studying the damage with the same focused attention he probably brought to business problems. What if it didn't have to take that long? "What do you mean?" Isla asked. "I mean, what if you had access to the best contractors in the city, the kind who usually work on million-dollar renovations and can get permits pushed through in days instead of weeks?" Isla stared at him. "Adrian, I can't let you. You're not letting me do anything. I'm offering to help someone I care about solve a problem by throwing money at it, by using resources I have access to for something that actually matters." Adrian's voice was patient but firm. "This isn't charity, Isla. This is what people do for each other. People like us don't do this for people like me." The words came out sharper than she'd intended, but the stress of watching her livelihood flood away had stripped her filter bare. Adrian stepped back like she'd slapped him. "People like us? You know what I mean." Isla gestured around the flooded kitchen. "This is real life, Adrian. This is what happens when you don't have safety nets and backup plans and teams of lawyers to handle emergencies. You can't just write a check and make it go away." "I'm not trying to make it go away. I'm trying to help you fix it." "Why?" The question came out raw, desperate. "Why do you care what happens to some random restaurant owner you met a week ago?" Marcus cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Maybe I should give you two some privacy." "No, stay," Isla said. "This concerns you too. If we can't reopen, you're out of a job." "Isla," Adrian said quietly, "you're not some random restaurant owner to me." "Then what am I?" "Your latest project. The interesting hobby you picked up to feel better about your empty penthouse and your 70-hour work weeks." Each word hit its target, and Adrian felt something cold settle in his chest. "Is that really what you think this is?" "I don't know what to think anymore." Isla's voice broke slightly. "A week ago, you were a stranger who kissed me to make someone else jealous. Now you're trying to solve my problems with your credit card, and I can't tell if this is real or if I'm just the latest way for you to prove to yourself that you're a good person. You think I'm trying to buy you? I think you're used to fixing things with money, and I think you can't handle the idea that some problems don't have easy solutions." Adrian was quiet for a long moment, processing her words. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. "You're right," he said. "I am used to fixing things with money. It's been my default setting for so long that I forgot other people might see it differently." He paused, looking around the flooded kitchen. "But you're wrong about one thing. I'm not doing this to prove I'm a good person. I'm doing it because the thought of you losing something you love makes me physically sick." Isla felt tears threatening at the edges of her vision. "Adrian, I fell in love with you, Isla. Somewhere between that first coffee and tonight's disaster of a dinner, I fell completely, terrifyingly in love with you. And yes, I want to help fix this mess because I have the means to do it. But if you need me to step back and let you handle it alone to prove that this thing between us is real, then that's what I'll do." The admission hung in the air between them, raw and honest and impossible to take back. Marcus whistled softly under his breath. "Well, damn." "But," Adrian continued, "I need you to know something. This isn't about the money. This isn't about proving anything to anyone. This is about not wanting to watch someone I love lose everything because of a stupid pipe when I have the power to help." Isla wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of kitchen grime across her cheek. "You love me?" "Terrifyingly, completely, inconveniently, yes." A laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep in her chest, part hysteria and part wonder. Inconveniently. My business partner thinks I've lost my mind. I turned off my phone during dinner. I learned to make pasta from scratch. For you. Adrian's smile was rueful. If that's not inconvenient love, I don't know what is. He's got a point, Marcus interjected. Man learns to cook for a woman, that's serious business. Despite everything, the flooding, the uncertainty, the fear, Isla found herself smiling. It was terrible pasta. It was amazing pasta, Adrian corrected. After you fixed it. We fixed it, Isla corrected. Together. Together, Adrian agreed. Which is what I'm hoping we can do with this too. Isla looked around the destroyed kitchen, then back at Adrian's face. She could see the uncertainty there, the fear that he'd pushed too hard too fast, that he'd misread what was growing between them. Okay, she said quietly. Okay? Okay. We fix this together, but I pay you back eventually. Every penny. Isla, every penny, she repeated firmly. That's non-negotiable. Adrian studied her face, seeing the steel beneath the tears, the pride that wouldn't bend even in crisis. Deal. Marcus clapped his hands together. Great. Now that we've got the romantic declarations out of the way, can we maybe do something about the fact that it's still raining inside my workplace? As if summoned by his words, 2 trucks pulled up outside, the emergency plumber and the restoration team that Adrian had somehow materialized from thin air. How did you even know who to call? Isla asked as uniformed workers began filing into the bistro with equipment and tools. I've renovated 3 restaurant spaces for the winery events. You learn which contractors can actually deliver under pressure. Over the next 4 hours, Isla watched Adrian transform from the uncertain man who'd burned bread to someone who coordinated emergency repairs with the efficiency of a general commanding troops. He spoke the contractor's language, knew which permits would be needed, understood load-bearing walls and electrical codes and drainage systems. This was Adrian in his element, solving problems, managing crises, turning chaos into organized action. But every few minutes he'd check in with her, not to take over but to make sure she agreed with the decisions being made about her space. It was her bistro, her dream, her choice. He was just providing the means to save it. By 3 a.m. the water was gone, the damaged equipment had been catalogued, and a timeline for repairs had been established. 5 days, the contractor promised. Maybe 4 if the electrical inspection went smoothly. 5 days, Isla repeated, sitting on the front steps of her bistro with Adrian beside her. I can handle 5 days. We can handle 5 days, Adrian corrected gently. Isla leaned against his shoulder, suddenly exhausted. I'm sorry for what I said earlier. About you trying to buy me. You weren't entirely wrong. I do try to solve problems with money. It's the only tool I've used for so long that I forgot there were others. What are the other tools? Adrian was quiet for a moment, considering. Time, attention, actually listening to what someone needs instead of assuming I know. He paused. Learning to make terrible pasta because it matters to someone you love. Isla tilted her head to look at him. You really love me. Is that so hard to believe? A little, she admitted. A week ago you were kissing me to make your ex-fiancé jealous. Now you're reorganizing your entire life around my restaurant schedule. A week ago, I was an idiot who thought the only way to feel better about himself was to make someone else feel worse. You changed that. I didn't change anything. I just asked you who you wanted to be. Same thing, Adrian said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the Seattle sky, Isla realized something had shifted between them tonight. They'd weathered their first real crisis together, and somehow, instead of breaking them apart, it had made them stronger. But as Adrian's phone finally buzzed back to life with 17 missed calls from Miles, she couldn't help wondering if the real test was still to come. Adrian stared at his phone screen in disbelief. 17 missed calls from Miles, 12 text messages and 3 voicemails marked urgent. But it wasn't Miles' messages that made his blood run cold. It was the single text from a number he'd deleted months ago, but still recognized. We need to talk. Meet me at the Harbor Club at 2 p.m. This concerns your new friend, V. Bad news? Isla asked, noticing his expression as they sat in his car outside the bistro, watching the early morning cleanup crew finish their work. Adrian hesitated. The smart thing would be to ignore Vivian completely, to block her number, and pretend the text had never arrived. But something about the way she'd written friend made him suspect this wasn't a conversation he could avoid. My ex-fiancé wants to meet, he said finally. Isla's eyebrows rose. The one from the gala? The whole reason you kissed me in the first place? Vivian. Adrian rubbed his forehead, feeling a headache building behind his eyes. She says it concerns you. Me? She doesn't even know me. She knows enough. Adrian's voice was grim. Vivian has a talent for finding people's pressure points and applying just the right amount of force to get what she wants. What does she want? I have no idea, but whatever it is, it won't be good. Isla was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Do you want me to come with you? No. Adrian's response was immediate and firm. Whatever game she's playing, I don't want you anywhere near it. Adrian, I'm not made of glass. I can handle whatever your ex has to say. It's not about what you can handle. It's about what she's capable of. Adrian turned to face Isla fully. Vivian doesn't just break things, she destroys them. And she's very, very good at finding exactly the right words to make people doubt everything they thought they knew about themselves. Sounds like you're speaking from experience. 3 years of it. Adrian's jaw tightened. She has a PhD in making people feel small. 2 hours later, Adrian walked into the Harbor Club feeling like he was stepping into a trap. The exclusive restaurant overlooked Elliott Bay, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view that normally commanded his attention. Today he barely noticed the sparkling water or the distant Olympic mountains. Vivian was already seated at their old table, the corner booth where they'd celebrated closing their first major distribution deal, where she'd said yes to his proposal, where she'd told him 6 months later that she was leaving him for Thomas. She looked exactly the same. Perfectly styled blonde hair, designer suit that probably cost more than most people's rent, and that smile that had once made him feel like the luckiest man alive, and later made him feel like the biggest fool. Adrian. She stood to greet him with air kisses that didn't quite touch his cheeks. You look different. Vivian. He remained standing, not trusting himself to settle into the casual intimacy of shared seating. What do you want? Straight to business. I've missed that about you. She gestured to the chair across from her. Please sit. This conversation requires a certain level of privacy. Against his better judgment, Adrian sat. The waiter appeared immediately, the kind of seamless service that came from recognizing faces worth 6-figure wine bills. The usual? The waiter asked Adrian. Just coffee, Adrian replied, not wanting to give Vivian the satisfaction of thinking this was a social call. Make it 2, Vivian added, though I remember when you used to order the good stuff. Her eyes flicked meaningfully toward the wine list. Thomas says your palate has become rather pedestrian lately. The jab hit its mark, but Adrian kept his expression neutral. I'm sure Thomas has opinions about many things that don't concern him. Actually, that's why I asked you here. Vivienne leaned forward slightly, her voice taking on the confidential tone she used when delivering particularly devastating news. Thomas is concerned about some of the choices you've been making lately. We both are. My choices are none of your business. They are when they affect our mutual interests. Vivian's smile sharpened. The Pemberton account, for instance. I hear you missed a rather important call yesterday. Adrian felt ice form in his stomach. How do you know about that? Thomas has been courting the Pembertons for months. They mentioned that Voss Vineyard's owner seemed to have lost interest in their business. Something about being unreachable during critical negotiations. One missed call doesn't mean... It does when that call was worth $2 million, and the client had to make other arrangements. Vivian's tone was sympathetic, in the way that meant she was enjoying every second of this. Thomas was happy to step in, of course. The Pembertons are very impressed with his availability. Adrian's hands clenched into fists under the table. You orchestrated this. I orchestrated nothing. You did this all by yourself when you decided to play house with that little restaurant girl. The casual dismissal in her voice when she said, restaurant girl, made Adrian's blood boil. Her name is Isla, and what's between us is none of your concern. Oh, Adrian. Vivian's laugh was like breaking crystal. Everything about this concerns me. Do you really think this is love, or are you just having a midlife crisis and trying to recapture some fantasy about being a regular person? You don't know anything about what I feel for her. I know you, Adrian, better than anyone. Vivian leaned back, studying him with the patience of a predator who knew her prey was already trapped. You're romanticizing poverty because you've forgotten what it actually costs. You think playing at being normal with some sweet little chef is going to fix whatever's broken inside you. There's nothing broken inside me, isn't there? Vivian tilted her head. When was the last time you felt truly successful? Not just financially, but successful in a way that mattered. You've been drifting for months, maybe years, and now you think this girl is the answer to questions you don't even know how to ask. Adrian hated how precisely she'd identified the restlessness that had been eating at him long before he'd met Isla. But he also knew that whatever Vivian was building toward would be designed to destroy the one good thing in his life. What do you want, Vivian? I want you to think carefully about what you're risking for a woman you've known for exactly 8 days. She pulled out her phone and showed him a screen. This is a photo from your little market adventure yesterday. You look happy, relaxed, like a man playing at being someone he's not. Adrian stared at the image, him and Isla laughing over something at the honey stand, looking for all the world like a normal couple, enjoying a normal afternoon. How did you? Social media is everywhere, darling. Someone posted this thinking it was sweet. The mysterious billionaire shopping for groceries like a regular person. But I wonder how long that novelty will last for both of you. Vivian swiped to the next photo. Isla helping Mrs. Patterson at the bistro, her face bright with genuine care and attention. She's lovely, Vivian said, her tone carefully neutral. Really, I can see the appeal. There's something so authentic about her, so real. She paused, letting the words settle. But here's what I find interesting. She doesn't know, does she? Know what? About the research we did on her. About her financial situation. Her credit score, the fact that her little restaurant has been operating on razor-thin margins for 2 years. Vivian's smile was razor-sharp. She doesn't know that you could have found out everything about her life with a single phone call. I would never— Of course you wouldn't. You're too honorable for that. But Thomas isn't. Vivian swiped to another screen. What looked like a credit report. Did you know she's been paying off her mother's medical bills for 6 years? That she refinanced the restaurant twice to keep it afloat? That the pipe burst yesterday wasn't just bad luck? The building's plumbing has been failing for months, and she couldn't afford to fix it preventively. Adrian felt sick. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to understand what you're really doing when you swoop in to save her restaurant. You're not her knight in shining armor, Adrian. You're her bailout. And eventually she's going to realize that no matter how genuine her feelings for you might be, she's financially dependent on a man she barely knows. That's not what this is. Isn't it? You paid for emergency contractors, restoration services, expedited permits. By my calculation, you've invested about $40,000 in a woman you met 8 days ago. Vivian leaned forward. How do you think that's going to feel to someone as proud as she obviously is? She's going to pay me back. With what money? Her restaurant makes maybe $60,000 a year profit in a good year. That's not enough to pay you back and keep her business running. Vivian's voice was gentle now, almost kind. You've created a situation where she'll either have to accept being your kept woman or destroy herself trying to maintain her independence. Adrian felt the world shifting beneath him, all the certainty he'd felt just hours ago crumbling like sand. Here's what's going to happen, Vivian continued. Eventually, the novelty of playing house will wear off for both of you. You'll start missing the stimulation of your real life, the challenge of building something meaningful, and she'll start feeling suffocated by obligations she can never repay. You're wrong. Am I? Tell me honestly, when you were organizing those contractors last night, didn't you feel more energized than you have in months? Not because of love, but because you were solving a complex problem, managing multiple variables, being the person you're actually good at being. Adrian's silence was answer enough. I'm not the villain here, Adrian. I'm trying to save you both from a situation that's only going to end in heartbreak. Vivian reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. Come back to the real world. Come back to the life you built, before you lose everything that actually matters. As Adrian sat there, feeling the weight of her words settle into his chest like stones, his phone buzzed with a text from Isla. Contractors say they can start tomorrow if we approve the final plans. Thank you for everything. I love you. The simple message should have filled him with warmth. Instead, all he could think about was Vivian's voice saying kept woman, and the crushing weight of obligations that could never be repaid. And for the first time since he'd kissed Isla at that charity gala, Adrian began to wonder if the biggest mistake he'd ever made wasn't kissing a stranger to make his ex jealous. Maybe it was falling in love with her afterward. Adrian hadn't slept in 36 hours, and it showed. He sat in his office at Voss Vineyards, staring out at the rolling hills of his Woodinville property, without really seeing them. The contracts for Isla's restaurant repairs lay spread across his desk, each signature representing another thread, binding them together in ways that now felt less like love and more like obligation. Vivian's words echoed in his head like a poison. You've created a situation where she'll either have to accept being your kept woman or destroy herself trying to maintain her independence. The worst part was that she wasn't wrong. "You look like hell," Miles said, appearing in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee and an expression of carefully controlled concern. "Thanks for the pep talk." Adrian accepted the coffee without looking up from the papers. "Want to tell me why I've been fielding calls from contractors about restaurant renovations? Or why the Pemberton account is now being handled by Thomas Brennan?" Adrian's jaw tightened. "Vivian told you about the Pemberton deal?" "She didn't have to. Thomas called personally to thank me for referring the business to him." Miles settled into the chair across from Adrian's desk. "Care to explain how we lost a $2 million account because you were unreachable for 4 hours? I was helping someone. The restaurant owner. Her name is Isla." Adrian's voice carried a warning that Miles chose to ignore. "Right. Isla. The woman you met 8 days ago and are now apparently financing a complete business renovation for." Miles pulled out his own phone, scrolling through what looked like financial documents. $43,000 so far, according to our accounts payable department. "I can spend my own money however I want." "Of course you can, but I'm your business partner and your friend, so I'm going to ask the question everyone else is too polite to voice. What the hell are you doing?" Adrian finally looked up and Miles was startled by the exhaustion and confusion in his friend's eyes. "I don't know," Adrian admitted quietly. "I thought I was helping someone I love. Now I'm wondering if I'm just making everything worse. Talk to me." For the next 20 minutes, Adrian laid out everything. The kiss, the connection, the way Isla made him remember who he used to be, and finally Vivian's devastating analysis of their financial dynamic. "She's not wrong about the money," Adrian concluded. "Even if Isla pays me back eventually, it'll take years, and every day until then, she'll know that her independence is an illusion." Miles was quiet for a long moment, considering. "Can I ask you something? Why do you think Vivian cares what you do with your personal life?" "Because she—" Adrian stopped, really thinking about the question for the first time. "I don't know. A woman leaves you for another man, humiliates you publicly, and then shows up 18 months later to give you relationship advice. That doesn't strike you as suspicious. She's trying to protect me from making a mistake, or she's trying to protect herself from something." Miles leaned forward. "Think about it. You've been miserable since the breakup, predictable, focused entirely on work, and suddenly you're taking afternoons off, turning off your phone, showing up to the office looking like you actually slept well for the first time in years. Your point?" "My point is that miserable Adrian was no threat to anyone. But Adrian in love, Adrian who remembers that there's more to life than quarterly profits, that's a different story." Before Adrian could respond, his phone rang. Isla's name appeared on the screen, and he felt his chest tighten with a combination of longing and dread. "Hey," he answered, trying to sound normal. "Adrian, are you okay? You sound—" "I'm fine. Just tired. The contractors finished the kitchen assessment. They can have everything operational by tomorrow afternoon if we approve the final invoice." Isla's voice was bright with relief and excitement. "I know it's more than we originally estimated, but how much more?" The question came out sharper than he'd intended, and Isla paused. "About 8,000. The electrical damage was worse than they thought, and we need to bring some things up to current code. But Adrian, it's going to be beautiful, better than it was before. $8,000. On top of the 43 he'd already spent, for a restaurant that might never be profitable enough to pay him back. Adrian, are you there?" "I'm here." He rubbed his forehead, feeling the headache that had been building for days finally reach a crescendo. "Isla, we need to talk." "Okay, when? I could come by your office or—" "Tonight. Come to my apartment tonight." There was something in his tone that made her pause again. "Is everything okay? We just need to talk." After he hung up, Miles studied his friend's face with growing concern. "You're going to break up with her. I'm going to be honest with her about what this really is." "Which is?" "A mistake." The word felt like swallowing glass. "A beautiful, terrible mistake that's going to hurt us both if I don't end it now." Miles shook his head. "You're letting Vivian win. I'm preventing a disaster." "No, you're creating one." Miles stood up, his voice sharp with frustration. "In the 3 years I've known you, I've never seen you as happy as you were the other morning when you came in talking about learning to cook pasta. And now you're going to throw that away because your manipulative ex-fiancé convinced you that love has to be financially balanced to be real. It's not that simple." "It's exactly that simple. Do you love her?" "Yes." "Does she love you?" "She thinks she does." "Stop." Miles's voice was firm. "Does she love you? Not what you think she should feel, not what Vivian says she feels. Does Isla Bennett love Adrian Voss?" Adrian was quiet for a long moment, remembering the way Isla had looked at him when he'd declared his love in her flooded kitchen, the absolute certainty in her eyes when she'd said they could fix it together. "Yes," he whispered. "Then everything else is just logistics." That evening, Isla arrived at Adrian's apartment with a bottle of wine and a smile that dimmed the moment she saw his face. "You look terrible," she said, setting the wine aside to study him with concern. "When's the last time you slept?" "Isla, sit down, please." The formality in his voice sent ice through her veins, but she perched on the edge of his couch, hands folded in her lap like she was preparing for bad news. "I need to tell you something," Adrian began, and then stopped, looking anywhere but at her face. "You're scaring me. I know about your mother's medical bills. I know about the restaurant's financial situation. I know you've been struggling for years." Isla blinked, confusion replacing fear. "How do you know that? Someone had you investigated." "You had me investigated?" Her voice was very quiet, very controlled. "No. God, no. Someone else did, and they told me about it because they wanted me to understand." Adrian ran his hands through his hair. "They wanted me to understand that by helping you, I was putting you in an impossible position." "Who is they?" "Vivian." Isla was very still for a moment. "Your ex-fiancé had me investigated." "Yes. And then told you that you were—" "What?" "Buying me. Making you financially dependent in a way that would eventually destroy what we have." Isla stood up slowly, walking to the window that overlooked the city. When she spoke again, her voice was calm in a way that terrified him. "And you believed her." "I believed the math. $43,000, Isla, soon to be 51. You make 60,000 a year profit in a good year. Even if you pay me back, it'll take you—" "Stop." She turned around, and Adrian was shocked to see that she was smiling. Not a happy smile, but the kind of smile people wore when something they'd feared was finally confirmed. "You actually sat down and calculated how long it would take me to pay you back. I was trying to understand. You were trying to put a price tag on what's between us." Her laugh was sharp, bitter. "How much is love worth, Adrian? What's the exchange rate on falling asleep in your arms? What do I owe you for the way you make me feel like the most important person in the world? That's not what I meant, isn't it?" Isla moved toward him, and Adrian saw something in her eyes he'd never seen before. Disappointment so deep it looked like grief. "You want to know what the worst part is? It's not that your ex-fiancé had me investigated. It's not even that she knows things about my life that I haven't told you yet. Then what? It's that you listened to her. It's that when someone who broke your heart told you that what we have isn't real, you believed her instead of believing in us." Adrian felt something cracking inside his chest. "I'm trying to protect you. From what? From being loved by someone who has the means to help when I need it? From being with someone who would rather solve my problems than let me struggle alone? From being trapped by obligations you can never repay? I never asked you to solve my problems, Adrian. You chose to, and now you're making me feel guilty for accepting help that you offered freely." Isla's voice broke slightly. "Do you have any idea how that feels?" "I'm sorry. I never meant—" "You meant exactly this." She moved toward the door, grabbing her purse. "You meant to find a reason to walk away before this got too real, before you had to choose between your old life and whatever this was becoming. That's not true, isn't it?" Isla paused at the door, looking back at him. "Tell me honestly, when Vivian was explaining all the reasons this wouldn't work, did any part of you feel relieved?" Adrian's silence was answer enough. "I thought so." Isla's smile was sad now, understanding. "You know what the tragedy is? I would have figured out a way to pay you back. It might have taken 5 years, maybe 10, but I would have done it, because that's who I am." She opened the door, then paused. "But you'll never know that now, because you decided to believe someone who doesn't love you instead of trusting someone who does." The door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow sounded like the end of everything. Adrian stood alone in his perfect empty apartment, surrounded by all the expensive things that had once meant success, and realized that for the second time in his life, he'd lost something that actually mattered. Only this time, he had no one to blame but himself. 2 weeks later, Adrian stood in the conference room of his Woodinville headquarters, staring at a contract that should have felt like victory. The Yamamoto deal, 3 years in the making, would establish Voss Vineyards as the exclusive supplier for the most prestigious restaurant chain in the Pacific Northwest. It was worth $15 million over 5 years, the kind of contract that would cement his reputation as one of the region's most successful vintners. "This is it," Miles said, sliding the signature page across the mahogany table. "Sign this, and we're officially playing in the big leagues." Adrian picked up his fountain pen, the same one he'd used to sign his first major deal 6 years ago, and found that his hand wouldn't move. "Problem?" asked Kenji Yamamoto, the chain's owner, his voice politely neutral. "No problem," Adrian said quickly, just reviewing the terms one more time. But he wasn't reading the contract. He was thinking about something Isla had said 2 weeks ago, right before she'd walked out of his life. "You decided to believe someone who doesn't love you instead of trusting someone who does." The conference room door opened, and Adrian's assistant appeared with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but Mr. Voss, there's someone here to see you. Says it's urgent." "Take a message," Miles said firmly. "We're in the middle of—" "Actually," said a familiar voice from the hallway, "I think Adrian will want to hear this." Mrs. Patterson shuffled into the conference room, leaning heavily on her cane and looking completely out of place among the expensive suits and legal documents. She wore her usual cardigan and sensible shoes, and carried a manila envelope that looked like it had seen better days. "Mrs. Patterson?" Adrian stood up, genuinely confused. "What are you doing here?" "Well, someone had to tell you what an idiot you're being," she said matter-of-factly, settling into an empty chair without invitation. "And since that girl of yours is too proud to do it herself, I figured it was up to me." The room fell silent. Miles cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Adrian, perhaps we could reschedule—" "No," Adrian said, his eyes fixed on the elderly woman who'd somehow tracked him down at his corporate headquarters. "Mrs. Patterson, how did you even find me?" "Google, dear. Amazing what you can learn about people these days." She opened her envelope and pulled out a stack of what looked like receipts, though I suspect I know some things about you that Google doesn't. She spread the papers across the conference table, and Adrian's breath caught. They were all receipts from Copper and Sage Bistro, dozens of them, dating back 3 years. But that wasn't what made his chest tight. It was the handwritten notes on each one. Mrs. P had a bad day, made her the mac and cheese special, no charge. Mrs. P's arthritis acting up, drove her home after lunch. Mrs. P's granddaughter graduated college, celebration coffee and pie on the house. That girl, Mrs. Patterson said, her voice gentle but firm, has been taking care of people for as long as I've known her, not because she expected anything in return, but because that's who she is. Adrian picked up one of the receipts, noting the date, just 3 days after her mother's funeral, according to the newspaper clipping Mrs. Patterson pulled out next. "She made me tea and listened to me cry about my Harold for 2 hours that day," Mrs. Patterson continued. "Never charged me a penny, never made me feel like I was taking up space she needed for paying customers." "Mrs. Patterson," Adrian said quietly, "why are you telling me this?" "Because that girl is miserable and you're the reason why." The elderly woman's eyes were sharp, unforgiving. "She won't admit it, of course. Too proud. But I've been watching her for 2 weeks, and she's not the same person." She pulled out another piece of paper, a newspaper clipping about the restaurant reopening. "Beautiful job on the renovations, by the way. Place looks better than it ever has. But the girl who runs it looks like she hasn't slept in days." Adrian's throat felt tight. "How is she?" "Heartbroken." Mrs. Patterson's answer was blunt. "And stubborn as a mule about pretending she's fine. I was trying to protect her. From what? From being loved by someone who wanted to help." Mrs. Patterson leaned forward, her voice gaining strength. "Let me tell you something about that girl. She's been paying off her mother's medical bills for 6 years. Never complained, never asked for help, never took a single shortcut. I know about the bills. Do you know she turned down 3 job offers from fancy restaurants in California because she couldn't abandon her regular customers? Do you know she's been setting aside money every month to create a scholarship fund for culinary students who can't afford school?" Adrian didn't know any of that. "That girl doesn't need protection from generosity," Mrs. Patterson continued. "She needs protection from people who think love has to be earned or paid for, or balanced on some cosmic scale." The conference room was dead silent. Adrian could feel everyone's eyes on him, but all he could see were those receipts with Isla's handwriting, documenting years of quiet kindness that no one was supposed to notice. "She loves you," Mrs. Patterson said simply. "Not your money, not your fancy wines, not your ability to solve problems. She loves the man who learned to cook terrible pasta because it mattered to her, the man who turned off his phone during dinner, the man who helped an old lady find her table at a charity gala." Adrian felt something break loose in his chest, a knot of fear and confusion that had been choking him for weeks. "I don't know if I can be that man," he admitted. "Of course you can. You already were, for a few beautiful days." Mrs. Patterson stood up slowly, gathering her papers. The question is whether you're brave enough to choose to be him again. She paused at the door, looking back at the room full of expensive suits and million-dollar contracts. You know what's funny about love? She said. It's the only thing that gets bigger when you give it away. Everything else, money, success, reputation, gets smaller. But love multiplies. She left, and the conference room remained silent for a long moment. Finally, Kenji Yamamoto spoke. That was illuminating. Adrian looked down at the contract in front of him, then at the receipts Mrs. Patterson had left behind. In his mind, he could hear Vivian's voice. Come back to the real world. Come back to the life you built. But he could also hear Isla's voice from that first morning in her bistro. What kind of man do you want to be? Gentlemen, Adrian said suddenly, standing up and putting down his pen. I need to postpone this signing. Adrian, Miles said carefully, this is a $15 million deal. I know exactly what it is. Adrian looked around the table at the confused faces. And I know exactly what I'm about to walk away from. But there's something more important I need to do. More important than $15 million? Yamamoto asked, genuinely curious. More important than anything. Adrian was already moving toward the door. I need to go fight for something that actually matters. Miles called after him. Where are you going? To get my life back. 20 minutes later, Adrian stood outside Copper and Sage Bistro, staring through the window at Isla as she worked behind the counter. She looked exactly as Mrs. Patterson had described, beautiful but tired, going through the motions of her day without the joy that usually lit her from within. The lunch rush was ending, and the restaurant was nearly empty except for Marcus in the kitchen and one customer reading a newspaper at the corner table. Adrian took a deep breath and walked inside. The door chime announced his arrival, and Isla looked up from the cash register she was cleaning. For a moment their eyes met across the space, and Adrian saw a flash of something, hope, maybe, or longing, before her expression went carefully neutral. We're about to close for the afternoon, she said, her voice professionally polite. I'm not here for food. Adrian walked slowly toward the counter, his heart pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. I'm here to tell you that you were right about everything. Isla's hands stilled on the register. Adrian, you were right that I felt relieved when Vivian gave me reasons to walk away. You were right that I chose to believe someone who doesn't love me instead of trusting someone who does. Adrian stopped directly in front of her, separated only by the counter that suddenly felt like an ocean. And you were right that I'm an idiot. I never called you an idiot. You should have, because only an idiot would throw away the best thing that ever happened to him because he was too scared to trust it. Isla's eyes were bright with unshed tears. What are you saying? I'm saying I love you. Not because you need saving, not because helping you makes me feel important, but because you make me want to be the man I forgot I could be. Adrian's voice broke slightly. I'm saying I just walked away from a $15 million deal to come here and ask if you'll give me another chance to prove that what we have is real. You walked away from $15 million. I walked away from $15 million to fight for something worth more than money. Adrian reached across the counter, covering her hands with his. I walked away to fight for us. Isla stared at him, tears finally spilling over. Adrian, I know I hurt you. I know I broke your trust. But if you'll let me, I want to spend the rest of my life proving that you were right to believe in us when I was too afraid to. For a long moment, the only sound in the bistro was the gentle hum of the coffee machine and the distant clatter of Marcus cleaning up in the kitchen. Then Isla smiled, the real smile, the one that had made Adrian fall in love with her in the first place. You really walked away from $15 million. Best decision I ever made. Well, second best. What was the first? Adrian's smile was soft, certain. Kissing you at that charity gala. Even though you did it for all the wrong reasons? Especially because I did it for all the wrong reasons. If I'd done it for the right reasons, I might never have discovered what the right reasons actually are. Isla laughed through her tears, the sound like music in the quiet bistro. So, Adrian said, his voice hopeful but uncertain, what do you say? Think we can figure out how to make this work? Isla looked at him for a long moment. This man who'd just given up a fortune to tell her he loved her, who'd chosen trust over fear, who'd finally learned the difference between helping someone and controlling them. I say, she said, walking around the counter to stand directly in front of him, that we make a pretty good team. And when Adrian kissed her this time, slow and sweet and full of promise, it tasted like coming home. 6 months later, the morning light filtering through the bistro's windows had a different quality now, softer somehow, warmer. Isla stood behind the counter, watching Adrian attempt to operate the espresso machine with the concentrated focus of a surgeon performing delicate procedure. "You're overthinking it," she said, trying not to laugh as steam shot everywhere except where it was supposed to go. "I'm being precise," Adrian corrected, his hair slightly disheveled from his battle with the machine. "There's a difference." "Uh-huh." Isla moved beside him, her hands covering his on the portafilter. "Feel the resistance. The coffee will tell you when it's ready." 6 months ago, she never could have imagined Adrian Voss in her kitchen at 6 a.m., wearing jeans and an old sweater, learning to make coffee for the early morning customers. But here he was, 3 days a week, helping with the breakfast rush before heading to his vineyard. The Yamamoto deal had eventually been renegotiated, on Adrian's terms this time, with clauses that protected his work-life balance and his right to be unreachable on certain days. It was worth 12 million instead of 15, but as Adrian had told Miles, some things are worth more than money. "There," Isla said, as perfect creamer formed on top of the espresso. "See? You listen to the coffee instead of trying to control it." "Wise coffee," Adrian murmured, stealing a quick kiss before carrying the cup to Mrs. Patterson, who had been watching their lesson with undisguised amusement. "About time that boy learned some humility," she said, accepting her morning tea. "Though I have to say, he makes a decent cup when he's not thinking so hard." The door chimed and Marcus appeared with the morning pastry delivery, shaking raindrops from his jacket. "Seattle's finest meteorological consistency strikes again," he announced, "though I saw something interesting on my way in. There's a for sale sign on the building next door." Isla and Adrian exchanged a look. They'd been talking about expansion for weeks, not because the bistro needed to be bigger, but because they'd dreamed up something new together. A small wine bar and tasting room where Adrian could showcase not just his own vintages, but bottles from small family vineyards that needed a platform. "Want to take a look after the morning rush?" Adrian asked. "Are you sure? It's a big step." "We're good at big steps," Adrian said, and Isla felt that familiar flutter in her chest at the way he said, "we." The morning passed in its usual rhythm, regulars stopping for their coffee and conversation, the gentle hum of the espresso machine, the smell of fresh pastries warming in the oven. But now there was an addition to the familiar symphony, Adrian's laugh mixing with Marcus's storytelling, his careful questions about customers' preferences, the way he remembered that Mr. Chen liked extra foam and Sarah from the bookstore always ordered a double shot. He was learning to be part of something instead of running it, and watching him discover the joy in that had been one of Isla's greatest pleasures. Around 10 a.m., when the breakfast crowd had thinned to a few laptop-wielding freelancers, Adrian's phone rang. He glanced at it, then at Isla. "Miles," he said, "probably about the Mitchell Vineyard acquisition." "Take it," Isla said. "But remember, boundaries," Adrian finished, smiling. "I remember." He answered the call and walked to the back of the bistro for privacy. Isla couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see his posture, relaxed, confident, but not consumed. When he returned 5 minutes later, he was already putting the phone away. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Better than okay. The Mitchell family wants to partner instead of sell. It means we can preserve their legacy while expanding our distribution." Adrian slipped his arms around her waist from behind. "And the best part? It's all handled. No emergency meetings, no crisis management, no working weekends. Look at you being all balanced and reasonable. I had a good teacher." At noon, they locked up for the afternoon break and walked next door to examine the empty space. It was smaller than Isla had expected, but filled with potential. Exposed brick walls, large windows facing the street, and a layout that would be perfect for intimate wine tastings. "What do you think?" Adrian asked, watching her move through the space. "I think," Isla said slowly, "it feels like the next chapter. Of the business? Of us." Adrian was quiet for a moment, understanding the weight of what she meant. 6 months ago, they'd been two separate people who'd collided by accident. Now they were building something together, not just a relationship, but a shared vision of what their life could look like. "There's something I need to tell you," Adrian said suddenly. Isla turned, noting the nervous energy in his voice. "What?" "I paid off the last of your mother's medical bills yesterday." Isla's breath caught. "Adrian, we talked about this. Before you get angry, let me explain." He held up his hands. "It wasn't about you owing me or me trying to fix your problems. It was about me wanting to give you the gift of not having that weight on your shoulders anymore. How much? Does it matter?" "Yes, it matters. I need to know what I'm paying back." Adrian was quiet for a long moment. You're not paying it back. Adrian, it was a gift, Isla. The kind of gift you give someone when you love them and you want to see them free to dream without limitations. His voice was gentle but firm. You've spent 6 years putting everyone else first. Let someone put you first for once. Isla felt tears threatening. You can't just, I did. And if you try to pay me back, I'll just donate an equal amount to the culinary scholarship fund you've been secretly building. How did you know about that? Mrs. Patterson may have mentioned it. Adrian's smile was soft, along with about 50 other things you do for people that you think no one notices. Isla stared at him, this man who'd learned to love her without trying to change her, who'd figured out the difference between helping and controlling. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for teaching me what it means to be part of something bigger than myself. They stood there in the empty space that would become their shared dream, holding each other as afternoon light streamed through the windows. Outside, Seattle continued its daily rhythm, rain and coffee, and the gentle bustle of people living their lives. But inside their future wine bar, time felt suspended, full of possibility and promise. Adrian, Isla said after a while, I love you, not because you paid off my debts or because you're helping me expand the business. I love you because you make me want to dream bigger than I ever thought possible. Even when I'm terrible at making espresso? Especially when you're terrible at making espresso. Adrian laughed, the sound echoing off the brick walls. In that case, you're going to love me for a very long time. I'm counting on it. And as they walked back to the bistro hand in hand past Mrs. Patterson, who was pretending to read her newspaper, instead of watching them through the window, past the regular customers who'd become like family, past all the small details that made up their shared life, Isla realized something profound. She'd spent years believing that love meant taking care of everyone else's needs before her own, but Adrian had taught her that real love meant finding someone who took care of you, so you could both be stronger together. That evening, as they closed the bistro and walked toward Adrian's car, which now had a parking spot permanently reserved behind the building, Isla felt the kind of contentment she'd never thought possible. Dinner at my place? Adrian asked, though they both knew the answer. Only if you let me cook. Deal, but I'm helping. You can chop vegetables. I can do more than chop vegetables. We'll see. As they drove through the Seattle evening, rain pattering softly against the windshield, Adrian reached over and took Isla's hand. No regrets? He asked quietly. About what? Any of it. The kiss, the complications, the money, the fight, the reconciliation, all of it. Isla considered the question seriously. 6 months ago, she'd been a woman running a small restaurant, focused on survival and paying off old debts. Now she was planning a business expansion with a man she loved, free from financial burdens, dreaming bigger than she'd ever dared. No regrets, she said firmly. Even the hard parts led us here. Even me being an idiot about the money? Especially you being an idiot about the money. It taught us both what we were really fighting for. Adrian lifted their joined hands and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. What are we fighting for? This, Isla said simply. The right to build something beautiful together? The right to love each other without keeping score? The right to dream big and mess up and try again? Sounds perfect to me. And as they pulled into the parking garage of Adrian's building, which had slowly become their building, filled with Isla's books and her grandmother's quilt, and the smell of whatever she'd been experimenting with in the kitchen, they both knew they'd found something rare. Not just love, but partnership. Not just passion, but purpose. Not just a relationship, but a life worth building together, one imperfect, beautiful day at a time. Have you ever had to choose between playing it safe and taking a leap of faith for love? What would you have done in Adrian's position when faced with that $15 million decision? And Isla, would you have been able to forgive someone who almost walked away out of fear? Share your thoughts on love, money, and second chances below. Your participation in the channel is very important, so please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.